Hi, I'm Bailey. My father gave our 3,000-acre ranch to my sister, not because I failed him, but because I didn't argue when they talked over me. They told everyone I walked away, but I was never even asked to stay. They changed the company name, erased my photo from our walls, and called me just the vet. But the cattle, the ones they planned to sell off for quick cash, those were mine. And I have the documents to prove it. So how did they think this would end? The morning air still held a touch of summer heat as I trudged across the pasture, my boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt. A chorus of low moos echoed in the background while I bottle-fed the last calf for the morning. Routine had its comfort, especially when the world outside this fence line rarely offered any. Just as I wiped my hands on the back of my jeans, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Carla, my assistant. No text, just a picture. I clicked it open. It was an image of a cream-colored invitation card embossed in gold. The Kressler Ranch Generational Transition Gala. It looked elegant, official, and beneath the grand heading were names: Sherwin Kressler, Isolde Marin Kressler. That was it. Not mine. I stared at it for a moment, trying to reason it away. Maybe they assumed I wouldn't come. Maybe they sent mine by mail. Maybe someone forgot. But when I checked the mailbox later, scrolled through my email, and even double-checked with Carla, there was nothing. No mistake, just silence. I went about my day as usual, or at least I pretended to. I ran my hands through coats, cleaned hooves, gave vaccinations. All the while, the weight of that missing name pressed harder against my chest than any physical chore. It's a funny thing, how absence can feel heavier than presence. By 5, I was in my truck, staring at the old barn in the fading light, debating whether to go. If this were any other day, I'd brush it off. I wasn't one for grand gestures or events with champagne flutes and hollow compliments, but this wasn't any other day. It was a statement, one I couldn't afford to ignore anymore. So I went. I didn't dress for the occasion. I didn't dig through the closet for the one decent dress I owned. I wore what I had on. Work jeans, button-up shirt, boots still caked with pasture soil. I didn't knock. I just walked into the main house, the same way I had since I was a child, only this time the hallway felt foreign. Voices floated through the entryway, laughter bouncing off the walls. The gathering was already in full swing, wine glasses clinking, light music playing. I stood in the doorway of the main room, unseen, or ignored. Either way, the feeling was the same. Isolde spotted me first. She was standing beside our father, her arm delicately looped through his, a flute of champagne in her other hand. Her dress was the color of ivory, clean and tailored. She turned toward me, her smile bright enough for everyone to see and just sharp enough for me to bleed on. "Oh, Bailey," she said with a laugh loud enough to hush the small crowd. "I always knew you were better with cows than people." There was a wave of chuckles. Even Dad grinned. I nodded once, didn't smile, didn't flinch, just stood there like I had when we were girls, when she used to tell our teachers I was a little slow but sweet. Same tone, same poison under the sugar. I moved through the crowd slowly, offering a few polite nods, making sure my boots didn't track too much dust on the rug. I didn't plan to stay long. I found the hors d'oeuvre table, poured myself half a glass of lemonade, avoided eye contact. The conversations buzzed around me, land values, cattle shows, tax credits, like I wasn't even in the room. Eventually, I walked back outside. The night had fallen quickly, and the air had turned still. I made my way to the truck and climbed in, turning the engine just enough for the radio to hum quietly. I didn't cry. Instead, I sat there, eyes locked on the porch lights flickering against the house's white siding. It looked so familiar, yet so far from anything I belonged to. And in the quiet hum of the evening, I remembered my grandfather's voice, years ago, standing with me by the birthing stall when Hope was born. He looked me in the eye and said, "You're the only one who listens to this land, Bailey. Not just works it, listens." I hadn't thought of that moment in years, but now it came roaring back, louder than the music inside that house. They'd written me out of the invitation. Then they laughed when I showed up. And that's when I realized they weren't going to stop pretending I wasn't family, not unless I made them stop. They didn't just erase me from the documents, they erased me from the room. That realization didn't hit me like a wave. It came in quietly, like a slow-moving fog, wrapping itself around my throat as I stepped farther into the living room. The room where I used to nap on the floor as a kid, while Dad and Grandpa talked cattle prices and weather patterns over lukewarm coffee. Now, every chair was filled. My name wasn't on the seating chart because there was no chart. There was only Isolda's plan, and I wasn't part of it. I stood near the back wall, where the coat rack used to be before she had it replaced with an abstract metal sculpture. Her kind of art, expensive, meaningless. Isolda was front and center, smiling like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. Her suit was tailored to perfection, cream-colored with just a hint of shimmer under the light. She held a pen in one hand and a glass of white wine in the other. Sherwin, my father, though the word felt increasingly foreign, sat beside her. His face was stern, like he was doing something difficult but necessary. A man doing what needed to be done. That's how he'd always liked to see himself. Isolda's lawyer stood just behind him, guiding him through the paperwork like a high-stakes chess coach. No one looked at me. Not Dad, not Isolda, not even the family friends I'd known since I was small. I leaned slightly to one side, trying to see the top page as he signed it. I didn't need to read the words. I already knew what they said. Sherwin Kressler was officially handing over controlling interest of our 3,000-acre ranch, the very one that bore his name, to my sister. Isolda let out a soft laugh, almost rehearsed, then turned to the crowd and said, "It's a new era for the Kressler legacy." The room filled with claps and smiles, a few nods of approval. One man whispered something about smart succession planning to the woman next to him. I caught just enough of it to feel my stomach twist. Still, no one looked my way. It wasn't the papers that hurt. I'd expected those. It was the absence of acknowledgement, the erasure of my years, my labor, my loyalty, the complete omission of me. I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears as I stared at the hands that once held mine at county fairs and guided mine when I bottle-fed my first orphaned calf. Now they just gripped a pen that signed me out of my own life. "Thank you all for being here," Isolda continued. "This isn't just a transfer of ownership, it's a transfer of vision, efficiency, scale, innovation. That's what the future of this ranch deserves." Not a single word about tradition, about heritage, about care, and certainly not a single word about me. I stood there long enough to feel my legs go stiff. A few guests began to rise, mingling, refilling drinks. I shifted back toward the hallway, trying to disappear into the woodwork. As I moved to leave, I overheard one of Dad's old friends, Gary Whitman, murmur to another, "Isn't Bailey here?" The woman shook her head. Maybe she finally gave up. Gave up? I wanted to turn around to tell them I hadn't given up. I'd been shoved out, rewritten. But I bit down hard, too proud to beg for visibility. The sound of glass clinking pulled me back. Isolde stood again, her wine raised. "Let's not forget," she said, her eyes sweeping the room until they landed squarely on me. "We'll still need someone to take care of the cows." That line landed like a slap. Polite chuckles echoed. Someone said, "Good one, Isolda." Another, "She's always had a way with animals." I didn't wait for more. I turned and walked out slowly, careful not to trip on the edge of the new rug by the door. My boots hit the porch wood heavier than usual. The air outside was still warm, but I felt cold. I made it to my truck, climbed in, and shut the door behind me. I sat there, hands on the steering wheel, heart pounding without rhythm. For a moment, I stared at the glow of the porch lights. Through the window, I could see them clinking glasses, celebrating what they called a legacy. But legacy meant more than land and money. Legacy was early mornings in the barn. It was nursing sick calves through winter storms. It was the year I stayed behind to run the place while Isolda studied branding strategies in New York. It was the calluses on my palms, the sunburn on my neck. And yet, I had no seat, no name, no voice. They didn't just erase me from the documents, they erased me from the room. By the time I made it back to my clinic, it was almost 11. The drive had been silent, no radio, no calls, just the soft hum of the tires over old county roads and the occasional tap of my fingers against the steering wheel. I didn't rush. I wasn't in any mood to face anyone, and the clinic, at that hour, was the only place in town where no one would ask how the big party went. I parked around back, where the security light barely reached. The place felt like a second skin, the comforting smell of hay, iodine, and warm fur still lingering in the air. I turned on just one lamp in the office, leaving the rest of the building in soft shadow. My desk waited like it always did. Scattered notes, invoices, and the small locked drawer that rarely saw daylight. I opened it slowly. Inside lay the things that had mattered more than any title or applause, the original Morrison Genetics LLC paperwork, all signed and notarized 5 years ago, and a photo. Not just any photo, the one of me and Hope, taken the day she was born. I must have been 28 then, hair tied back, jeans stained, kneeling beside the tiny wet calf with my hand still under her neck. Grandpa had taken that picture himself, then printed and framed it. For a long time, it had hung in the ranch hallway, a silent badge of who was truly there, until it vanished. I sat back and held the photo in my hands, eyes tracing the edge of the frame. 10 years could change a lot, but it hadn't changed what that moment meant. I could still hear his voice, plain as day, when he leaned down and said, "One day, they'll call this place yours." He hadn't whispered it like a hope. He'd said it like a fact, like something already decided. But facts don't mean much when the story gets rewritten. That photo was gone from the house now, as was I, not just physically, but erased from memory. I didn't sleep that night. Around 1:30, I drove back to the main house, not to confront, just to confirm something that had been gnawing at the back of my mind. The house was quiet. Most of the guests had gone home, lights dimmed to a soft glow in the hallways. I let myself in through the back, the same way I always had. The air inside was stale with the remnants of too many people and too little sincerity. I walked to the front hallway, where the new legacy wall had been installed last spring. It used to be a collection of casual photos, candids of our family through the years, Mom's garden party, Dad's first cattle auction, me and Isolda in matching overalls at 6. Now it was a professionally curated installation, black frames, matte prints, and the plaque above, the Kressler Vision, Generations of Strength. I scanned each frame carefully, not one photo of me, not from shows, not from sales, not from the years I ran the ranch when Dad had surgery. But then I saw one, Hope in her prime, standing proud in a pasture at sunset. And there, standing beside her, a woman in crisp white, Isolda. Not possible. I stepped closer, squinting at the edges. The background had been altered. I knew that picture. I had the original version. It had been me beside Hope. The angle, the way the sun hit her left ear, the placement of the gatepost. It was all identical. They had cropped me out. I didn't feel anger in that moment, not yet. What I felt was something quieter, deeper, like finding out someone had sold your mother's wedding ring to pay for a party you weren't invited to. I walked back out the way I came, pulled into the clinic again around 3, and sat at my desk in silence for a long while. This wasn't a case of being forgotten. It was deliberate. Erasing me from the ranch wasn't enough. Isolde wanted to rewrite the entire narrative, make herself the lone heir of legacy, the face of our family, the soul of a place she had only come back to after it was polished. I opened my laptop, pulled out a backup drive, and started gathering everything. Scanned letters from Grandpa, photographs, financial statements, bloodline charts, the ones showing how every prize-winning animal from the last decade had come through my breeding program. I wasn't going to throw a fit. I wasn't going to demand a seat at a table already cleared of anything real. I was going to build my own. I labeled the folder, "When They Forget Who Built It." By the second morning after the gala, I had begun to feel the kind of numb that comes from too many wounds, too fast. Not sharp pain anymore, just the dull awareness of things being wrong. I sat in my office early, the sun barely rising, flipping through files I'd already read twice. The silence was only broken by the occasional thud of hooves from the nearby barn and the mechanical whir of the coffee maker sputtering out the last drops. I was halfway through logging a calf's antibiotics when my phone buzzed. It was a number I recognized. Tom Rivers, a longtime buyer from Abilene. We hadn't talked since last fall's breeding season. "Hey, Bailey," he started, voice casual. "Listen, just wanted to double-check. You still involved in the Kressler breeding contracts?" "I got an update from Isolde's team about a switch. Said you're stepping back?" I blinked, phone pressed to my ear. "I'm sorry." "What switch?" He cleared his throat. "New documents came through last night. Everything's now under Sterling Genetics. It all looked official. Just wanted to hear it from you before I sign anything." I didn't answer right away. My jaw tensed. "Tom, I've signed nothing. No changes have been made on my end. Send me what you received." He promised he would, and we hung up. My hands didn't move for a while. I sat there, staring out the window, watching a crow hop along the gravel path. Unconcerned, unbothered. I envied it. 30 minutes later, an email popped into my inbox. Attached was a multi-page PDF. Top header, Sterling Genetics. Presenter, Isolde Kressler. My name, gone. I scrolled. My bull lines, my herd performance metrics, my breeding rotation schedules, all still there, just without my name, my company, or any legal attribution. Buried in the last page was a quote, "Streamlining operations for a new era of ranching." My name wasn't forgotten. It was removed. Later that day, needing some air and something solid to chew on, I drove to the diner in town. I sat in the back booth, ordered coffee and hash browns, and pretended to scroll my phone. Behind me, 2 older ranch wives were talking. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but their voices, a touch too loud and a bit too practiced, made it impossible to miss. "She never really wanted it anyway," one said. "Yeah," the other replied. "Isolde told me she's always been more into animals than people. Said Bailey even declined the ranch years ago." My throat tightened, not with sadness, with disbelief. So now I'd not only been removed from the paperwork, but painted as someone who chose to walk away. All those years, working holidays, missing weddings, sleeping in the barn during storms, dismissed as personal preference. When I left the diner, I didn't go back to the clinic. I turned the truck toward the ranch house. Dad's truck was parked under the carport when I arrived. I didn't knock. I walked in like I used to, straight through the side door and into the main room, where Sherwin was sitting in his chair with the afternoon paper folded on his lap. He looked up. "Bailey," he said simply, not surprised. I got straight to the point. "Why is Isolde signing my contracts?" He blinked, as if the question was more complicated than it was. "She's stepping up, taking on what you weren't ready for." The words landed like a slap, but I didn't flinch. "I never said I wasn't ready," I answered, voice level. "I said I wasn't asked." Sherwin set the paper down. "Bailey, come on. You've always preferred staying out of the mess. You made your choices." "I made my choices because I had to. While you were getting surgeries and Isolde was consulting from a distance, someone had to run the land." He rubbed his forehead like the conversation was an inconvenience. "You're good at what you do, Bailey. No one denies that. But this is about the future, growth, big moves." I stepped forward. "You think growth means erasing the people who built it, who kept it breathing when it was about to fold?" He didn't answer, and maybe that was all the answer I needed. I left without another word. By sundown, I had driven straight to the county clerk's office. It was nearly closing time, but they knew me there. I filed a notarized ownership notice for Morrison Genetics, reinforcing the exclusive rights to every bloodline that passed through my program, past and present. No need to explain. The papers spoke for themselves. Later that evening, I sat at my desk in the clinic, the air cool and quiet around me. The stars had just started peeking through the window panes. I picked up my phone, opened a new message thread with my attorney, and typed 3 words: "Time to talk." 2 mornings later, I found myself back at the ranch house. Not because I wanted to be, but because Sherwin had insisted on hosting a small brunch with some of his longtime ranch partners. He called it a thank you gathering for their support during transition. I called it something else in my head. A staged event where I'd be trotted out as proof everything was still one big happy family. I didn't dress up, didn't wear anything that suggested I was there to impress. Just clean jeans, a chambray shirt, and my hair pulled back into a ponytail. It was how I looked when I did real work. That morning, I figured I'd show up like myself, even if they'd all forgotten who that was. I walked in through the back door, as I always had growing up. Inside, Isolde was already holding court in the dining room. She was dressed in pale gray linen, soft makeup, polished heels. She stood beside Sherwin like she'd always belonged there. Her voice rose and fell in that smooth, curated way of hers, the way politicians talked on TV. There were 8 guests seated around the dining table, mostly men in button-downs and clean cowboy boots, the kind who hadn't worked a pasture in a decade. A few nodded politely at me, but no one got up. The only open chair was off to the side, near the window. It wasn't part of the conversation. I poured myself coffee from the carafe, sat quietly, and listened. They talked about expansion plans, a new app Isolde's team was developing to track feeding cycles, and how branding matters more than breeding now. I sipped slowly, forcing myself not to react. And then Sherwin, sitting straight-backed at the head of the table, looked directly at me for the first time that morning and said it, casually, like a compliment, like I should feel honored. "She knows cows better than people. She should stick to them." The room chuckled. One man actually tipped his cup toward me like he was toasting. I didn't laugh, didn't say a word, but my stomach dropped like someone had pulled the floor from under me. That one sentence, those 9 words, were worse than being left off the invitation, worse than having my name stripped from the contracts. because this time he said it to my face. Not like I wasn't there, but like he wanted me to hear it, to believe it. I didn't finish my coffee. I stood, set the cup down gently, and walked out without looking back. The drive back to my clinic blurred by. I don't even remember which roads I took. I just remember the silence, and those 9 words echoing over and over. She knows cows better than people. She should stick to them. I remembered staying up all night nursing him through pneumonia 2 winters ago. I remembered sleeping in a chair by his hospital bed, handling payroll and cattle feed orders from my phone. I remembered being the one who stayed when everyone else flew home for holidays. But none of that mattered, did it? By the time I reached my office, the afternoon sun had dipped enough to cast long shadows through the side windows. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat at my desk, breathing. And then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Isolda. I wasn't in the mood, but I checked it anyway. My thumb hesitated before tapping the screen. The message wasn't meant for me. It read, "The dumb cow whisperer won't fight. She never has." There was no context, just that. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't reply, didn't throw the phone, didn't scream. I just read it over and over, and something inside me snapped, not violently, but with precision. Like the sound of wire pulled too tight, finally giving way. She never has. She was right, of course. I hadn't fought. Not publicly, not loudly. I'd let them talk, let them assume, let them take, but I wouldn't anymore. That night, I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. I began writing a press release under the Morrison Genetics name, a name they had forgotten, but I still legally owned. I laid out the full scope of our breeding program, the genetic milestones we'd achieved, the data that supported our 6-figure contracts. I pulled up photos, timelines, audit trails, all tied directly to me, my records, and my files. I created a spreadsheet that tracked the lineage of every champion bull that had come through our line in the last 10 years, all originating with Morrison Genetics, my name on every report. Then I called the bank to confirm something I hadn't checked in months. The Morrison Genetics account, the one Grandpa set up for future expansion, was still untouched, still protected. When the call ended, I looked at the time. Nearly midnight. I stood, stretched, and walked out to the barn. The night was cool and silent except for a few owls calling in the distance. I walked down the aisle slowly, touching each stall gate as I passed. Hope was asleep, her breathing slow and steady. I leaned on the rail beside her, the smell of hay and warm fur grounding me. They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought I'd stay in my place. They thought I'd let them write the story. But I've been here all along, building, watching, remembering. And now I'm ready. The drive down to Dallas took just under 2 hours, but in my head, it stretched much longer. I left just before dawn, wanting time to walk the show floor before the crowd thickened. I didn't play music. I didn't make a phone call. I just kept my hands steady on the wheel, watching the empty road unfold before me, and rehearsed what I would and wouldn't say, to Isolda, to potential buyers, to myself. By the time I pulled into the expo center, the parking lot was already dotted with rigs and pickups, banners flapping in the breeze. I parked farther back than usual, not because I had to, there were still open spots, but because I needed the extra steps to settle my breath. Inside, the space buzzed. The Texas Cattlemen's Expo was the kind of event where industry veterans shook hands over black coffee, young ranchers compared calf weight gains, and everyone eyed each other's boots. I'd walked these halls a dozen times, but this time, I wasn't here as a vet or a rancher or even a daughter. I was here as the rightful owner of something they'd tried to steal. That's when I saw it. A massive screen over booth 12. Sterling Genetics, Legacy Meets Innovation with Isolde Kressler. My stomach turned. There, plastered in full color, were charts I had built, data I had logged at 3 a.m. in the clinic, photos I had taken of bulls mid-stride, flanked by calves whose bloodlines I had tracked since birth, all rebranded as if I had never existed. I walked closer. My name wasn't anywhere. At the booth, a young man in a polo shirt with Sterling embroidered on the chest handed out glossy folders. I took one and opened it. Page after page mirrored the files on my hard drive. Slight tweaks, design flourishes, but the content was mine. As I flipped to the fourth page, a gray-haired man stepped beside me and leaned in. "You one of the handlers?" he asked, casually. "I'd like to speak with the exec, the real decision-maker." I looked up at him, not unkindly, and offered a half-smile. "You already are." His brow lifted. "You're Bailey Kressler, Morrison Genetics." His eyes widened slightly. "Well, I'll be damned." I didn't need to explain further. I saw the recognition pass over his face, the shift from confusion to something like embarrassment. He glanced at the folder in his hand, then back at me. "I was told this was all Isolde's work." "You were told wrong," I replied. I turned and walked toward the side corridor where a row of quieter meeting booths lined the wall. I slid into one, pulled out my tablet, and connected to the venue's Wi-Fi. Within minutes, I uploaded my full genetic archive to a private cloud link. Every breeding contract, every award-winning bull's lineage, every lab result. I wrote a brief email to my contact list, clients, breeders, buyers, and attached the link. Subject line, "For accuracy in representation from the true source." I hit send. 5 minutes later, I received a reply from Hank Morales, one of the biggest breeders in West Texas. "Appreciate the clarity. Had a weird feeling, canceling our boothside deal with Sterling." That was the first domino. By noon, I'd already fielded 3 more messages just like it. I didn't gloat. Not outwardly, I kept moving. In the early afternoon, I met with a group of industry peers in a private booth. Men and women who'd worked with my grandfather, who'd bought from my lines for years. I handed each of them a folder, no gloss, no gold lettering, just truth. "I'm not here to discredit anyone," I told them. "You're free to do business with whoever you like. Just make sure they actually own what they're selling." There was a silence in the room that didn't feel empty. It felt like confirmation, like they already knew. As I stepped out, I caught a glimpse of Isolde across the aisle. She was speaking with a man in a suit who looked increasingly skeptical. Her voice was louder than usual, her gestures wider. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. A few booths over, her assistant picked up a call. His face tightened. I knew that look. Loss. By the time I walked through the exit doors, the sky had shifted. What had started as a crisp morning now gave way to a warm, amber light washing over the parking lot. I reached my truck, opened the door, and glanced once more over my shoulder at the banner still hanging above the Sterling booth. Legacy Meets Innovation. I smiled. Let's see who really owns it. The call came just before 6. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand, the kind of buzz that never means anything good at that hour. I was already awake, hadn't really slept, just lying there, arms folded over my chest, eyes fixed on the ceiling fan as it creaked through its slow, endless rotations. "Miss Bailey?" It was Nate, one of the younger ranch hands still working the south paddocks. "One of the new calves isn't responding. She won't stand up. We've done everything we were told, but it's bad." I didn't need to ask which one. Hope's last heifer, born small but full of fire. I'd only just weaned her from supplemental feeding a few weeks ago. I threw on jeans and boots and drove without brushing my hair, still in the same sweatshirt from the night before. The gravel under my tires cracked in protest as I rolled up to the pen. Nate was standing just outside the stall, hat off, hands wringing. She was still breathing when I stepped in, barely, chest rising with effort. Eyes dull, not frightened, just resigned. I didn't cry. I'd cried plenty for calves over the years, but not this one, not right now. I knelt beside her, placed a hand on her side, felt the labored rhythm beneath my palm. I looked around the pen. No clean straw, water dish tipped sideways. They'd overcrowded this paddock. Too many stressed animals jammed together for Isolda's AI breeding plan. No one checking recovery rates, no post-weaning protocols, just efficiency charts. The heifer stopped breathing 7 minutes later. No noise, no drama, just silence. I told Nate I'd take care of it. He didn't argue. I dug the hole myself, out by the East Grove where Grandpa and I used to walk on cool fall evenings. The soil was softer there. I didn't mark the grave with anything fancy, just a stone, flat and simple. When I finished, I stood still for a while, staring at that small patch of earth. The wind moved the trees around me gently, as if offering comfort I didn't ask for. No one came to help. Not Tia, not any of the hands, not Sherwin. They were all busy prepping for Isolda's next big announcement. Some media event, last I heard. I went home, showered off the dust, and sat at my desk to catch my breath. That's when the live stream notification buzzed on my laptop. Kressler Ranch, live announcement. Curiosity and fury don't play well together, but I clicked. There she was, Isolda, standing in front of the main barn, flanked by crisp signage and potted succulents someone probably rented just for the press. "We're thrilled to announce," she said with that trademark warmth that made strangers trust her instantly, "our full transition into next-gen breeding with Sterling Genetics." Her voice didn't shake once. "As part of this shift, we'll be auctioning off the remaining legacy stock, including Hope, our prized dam, to make way for a new line built on data, not sentiment." I stared at the screen, my knuckles white from gripping the edge of the table. Hope, not just any cow, the heart of our bloodline, the animal my grandfather once called the soul of this place. And now, a line item in her pitch deck. The camera panned slightly, catching Sherwin nodding in the background, as if this had been the plan all along, as if the past meant nothing. I drove back to the ranch in under 15 minutes. The gate was closed when I arrived, but I still had the code. I parked behind the main barn and made my way around the back, toward the pasture. Hope stood in her usual pen, calm, unaware. And the gate had a new padlock, the kind we never used, industrial, impersonal. A boy, maybe 16, face I didn't recognize, stepped forward from the shadows. "I'm sorry, Miss Bailey," he said, hesitating. "I was told you're not allowed back here. Orders came from up top." I nodded once. Understood. Then I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out a red ribbon, worn but intact, the same kind Grandpa tied to Hope's stall when she was just a calf. I looped it through the gate, knotted it gently, and stepped back. "Let her know someone remembers," I said quietly, mostly to myself. I walked away without looking back. Back at the clinic, I didn't pause to breathe. I locked the door, shut the blinds, and opened the file drawer beneath my desk. Out came the folder labeled Contingency. Inside were the original registration documents, transfer restrictions, genetic ownership claims, a notarized clause about Hope's bloodline requiring ethical management in line with traditional breeding methods, signed by Grandpa himself and filed with the county in 2014. I pulled out my phone. The first call was to my lawyer, the second to the state livestock registry, the third, the press. A week passed in a haze of paperwork, legal coordination, and more silence than I thought I could stand. I kept to myself, fielded questions only when necessary, and waited for the one day that would change everything. Isolda's legacy expansion ceremony was set for a Saturday afternoon, perfect timing to catch press, industry partners, and just enough social media to make it trend. I didn't get an invitation, of course, but that wasn't needed. I already knew the schedule, the talking points, even the menu. Her team wasn't as tight-lipped as they thought. I arrived 30 minutes early, dressed in a tan blouse and dark slacks. Nothing flashy. Just enough to blend in with the crowd. I parked around the far side of the pasture lot, next to the equipment shed, where guests weren't expected to come. The event was already humming. String lights were being adjusted, folding chairs set in perfect rows, the ranch logo, or rather Sterling Cattle Genetics, printed across crisp white banners. The new marquee stood tall above the entrance gate. Sterling Cattle Genetics, revolution begins here. No mention of Morrison, of Kressler, of me. I stayed back at first, close to the shade of the big pecan tree near the pasture fence. My hands were steady, but my heart thudded with the rhythm of something final. Inside my bag was a manila envelope, thick with originals, notarized pages, certified copies, proof of everything they tried to steal. As people settled, the lead reporter from Texas Farm Media stepped forward with a clipboard. I caught him just as he finished a conversation with one of Isolda's assistants. "Excuse me," I said. "I'd like you to have this." He raised a brow, taking the envelope with a bit of hesitation. "You're Bailey Kressler, Morrison Genetics, the name that's missing." His expression shifted. I could see the wheels turning. "What is this?" "Facts," I said. "The kind you might want before quoting anyone." He opened it right there, skimming the first few pages. Then he saw the flash drive clipped to the back flap. "It's all in there," I added. "The legal history, the ownership filings, and a recorded will, signed by the man who built this place." His eyebrows shot up. "Sherwin?" "No, my grandfather, the one who actually understood what legacy meant." The ribbon cutting was just beginning. Isolda stood on the makeshift stage beside Sherwin, her hair perfectly waved, her smile wide and rehearsed. She started her speech as the reporter stepped away from me and spoke urgently into his headset. I watched as something shifted on stage. A whisper into her ear, her mouth pausing mid-sentence. Then the screen behind her, the one prepped for her promotional video, flickered. It wasn't her video that played. It was my grandfather, grainy, old, but unmistakable. He sat at his desk, hat off, hands folded, voice strong. "I created Morrison Genetics to preserve the work of 3 generations. This legacy, especially the bloodlines of Hope and her descendants, is entrusted solely to Bailey Kressler. This isn't a gift, it's recognition, because she's the one who stayed." There were gasps from the audience, murmurs, then silence. I felt none of the panic I expected, no shakiness, just breath. The screen went dark, reporters swarmed Isolda. One cameraman turned his lens toward the side gate where a truck had just pulled up. Livestock trailer hitched. The vet stepped out, clipboard in hand, legal documents in tow. Hope was led out gently, head high, her red ribbon still tied to the halter. She followed me without resistance, walking down the gravel path like she knew what was happening. I didn't turn back to look at Isolda. I didn't need to. Sherwin didn't say a word. He stood motionless as the trailer door closed and the latch clicked. Tia met me by the driver's side, arms crossed, tears in her eyes. She hadn't worked at the ranch for months, but she showed up that day. "He knew it, Bailey. she said softly. All along, he just didn't want to lose her again. I didn't reply, not out of coldness, just that nothing needed to be said. I drove out slowly, the gravel kicking up dust behind me, Hope's silhouette visible through the trailer slats. Later that week, I sat in an attorney's office and signed new paperwork. Kressler Farms, now officially operating in joint partnership with Morrison Genetics. Clean, simple, protected. I wasn't taking everything, just what was always mine. The legacy wasn't just protected, it finally had the right name on it. After the ceremony, the days moved differently. The ranch didn't buzz the way it used to. It exhaled. No more corporate teams walking around with clipboards, no more email blasts or photo ops, just the sound of cows calling across the pasture and the rhythmic clack of gates swinging closed in the wind. Isolde packed up the following Monday. I didn't see her go, but Tia told me she'd left early, just after sunrise. No goodbye, no message. Just a text to Sherwin and a signed deed for the property she bought 2 counties over. Something smaller, easier to manage. Sherwin didn't say much either. He kept to the main house, his schedule more rigid than ever. He hadn't come by the clinic since the unveiling, hadn't asked about the new calf, or stopped to comment on the press, or even said the word hope. The man who once ran every fence line with me in the truck didn't seem to know where I worked anymore, but I still showed up every morning before dawn. The work never stopped, and truth be told, I didn't want it to. Routine kept me grounded, feeding, checking vitals, monitoring pregnancies. It was something solid beneath all the noise. Late one afternoon, I was in the far stall of the clinic tending to a calf that had taken a rough fall. Nothing broken, just a limp that would need watching. The barn doors creaked open behind me. I didn't look up. Footsteps crossed the concrete, light and small. Not Sherwin's, not any of the hired hands. I turned. Lily stood there. Isolde's daughter. 14 now, maybe 15. Hair pulled back, jeans too long for her legs, a worn canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She didn't speak at first, just walked up and handed me something. A notebook. Brown leather, cracked at the edges. My breath caught when I saw the initials pressed into the bottom corner. W.J.K. My grandfather's. He left it in Mom's old office, Lily said softly. I don't think she ever opened it. I figured, maybe it's meant for you. I took it slowly, nodding once. Thank you. She hesitated, then glanced at the calf beside me. She's okay? She'll heal, I said. Takes time, but she'll walk straight again. Lily gave me a faint smile, then walked out without another word. When I got back inside later that evening, I made tea and sat at my kitchen table with the notebook. It smelled faintly of tobacco and dust, familiar, almost comforting. Most of the entries were in Grandpa's tidy block-letter handwriting. Breeding notes, pasture maps, supply logs. Then, halfway through, I found a folded page marked with a corner crease. I opened it. Legacy doesn't live in land or stock, the page read. It lives in who's willing to wake up before the sun for it. I sat there for a long time, staring at those words. They weren't poetic, they weren't fancy, but they were him, plain, purposeful, exact. He knew who I was, even when others tried to forget. The next morning, I was feeding the heifers when I saw Sherwin's truck pull into the lot. He didn't park out front, just turned off the engine halfway up the drive, got out, and leaned against the fence near the gate. I finished my work before approaching. He didn't wave, didn't smile. Morning, he said. Morning, I echoed. He looked past me toward the barn. It's running smoother now. It's working, I said. Another pause. I was wrong, he said finally, about how things should have passed down. I didn't answer, not right away. He didn't follow it with "I'm sorry." He didn't offer an excuse, just that one admission, clean, spare, quiet. And maybe that was all there was room for between us now. I nodded once. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod back before turning and walking toward his truck. That afternoon, I took Hope's newest calf, barely 6 weeks old, out to the main pasture. She trotted beside me, still a little clumsy, ears twitching at every bird that called overhead. I led her along the old trail behind the barn, the same one Grandpa used to walk every Sunday. At the fence line, I met with 2 young women from the ag school nearby. I handed over copies of our new mentorship program and showed them the new rotation pasture that would be theirs to manage come spring. Real work, I told them. Dirty work, the kind that makes you want to quit some days. But if you're still standing at the end of a week like that, then maybe it's the work that belongs to you. They nodded, serious, wide-eyed, hungry for it. As the sun dipped, I walked the long way back, cutting through the grove where we buried the heifer. The grass had started growing over the stone, quiet, unremarkable, but solid. By the time I reached the old oak tree behind the barn, the sky had turned that particular shade of gold that only happens in late fall. I placed my hand on the trunk, worn smooth by time and memory. "You were right, Grandpa," I whispered. "The land remembers." Then I turned, and I walked forward, never once looking back. Some wounds don't need to close completely. They just need to stop bleeding. Some people think legacy is just about land and titles, but the truth is, legacy lives in those who show up day after day, even when no one's watching. What would you do if your own family tried to erase you? Let me know in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for more powerful stories like this one.
Hi, I'm Marlena. Last week, my sister looked me straight in the eye and said, "Why don't you just disappear?" And my mother? She agreed. So I left. Quietly. No shouting, no scene, just silence. This morning, they called me 13 times. But long before that moment, they'd already started cutting me out of family photos, out of public speeches, out of my own memories. They erased me like I was an inconvenience. What happens when your own blood rewrites your story without you? And more importantly, what do you do when you decide to write it back? Dinner had been quiet, but not peaceful. Vera had spent most of it pushing food around her plate, tapping her fork against the dish like she was waiting for a cue only she could hear. Clara sat across from me, glass of wine in hand, eyes drifting toward the television that wasn't even on. The roast was lukewarm, the salad untouched. No one had said much. That should have warned me something was coming. It did. Vera set her fork down with a sharp clink. "Why don't you just disappear?" I blinked. My brain didn't quite catch up with my ears at first. She said it casually, like ordering a refill. No heat, no sarcasm. Just a flat suggestion to vanish. Before I could respond, before I even found breath, Clara looked up from her wine and added, "Maybe we'd all be better off." And there it was. The sentence that erased me. I didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't ask why. I just stared at both of them and realized, for the first time in my adult life, that they meant it. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were just tired of pretending I belonged at that table. I've learned a few things about my family over the years. 1. Whoever talks louder wins. 2. Silence, when wielded right, can last longer than any scream. So I said nothing. Instead, I stood up, excused myself without being asked, and climbed the stairs to what used to be my room. It had changed. The posters were gone. Half my books were in boxes I didn't pack. A stack of folded linens sat where my nightstand had been, like someone had already begun the process of converting it into a guest room. I didn't linger. I pulled out the old canvas bag I kept under my bed, tossed in my laptop, a few chargers, a change of clothes, and one photo May and Dad, standing in front of the cabin in Sisters, Oregon, the day we brought home that ridiculous carved moose statue Clara hated. His arm around my shoulder, my smile real. We both looked like we belonged somewhere. By the time I reached the bottom of the stairs, they were still seated. Vera was scrolling on her phone. Clara poured another inch of Merlot. As I reached for my keys, Clara didn't even look up. "You always take things too personally," she said, like it was some medical diagnosis. I held the door a second longer than necessary. "I won't make this mistake again," I told her. It wasn't a threat, it was a vow. No one followed me out. The sky outside was low and heavy, the kind of gray Oregon specialized in this time of year. I didn't even turn on the radio, just drove, street after street, until the road narrowed and I saw Harper's porch light blinking against the dusk like it was waiting for me. She opened the door before I knocked. Didn't ask anything. Just stepped aside to let me in, like this wasn't the first time I'd come undone at her threshold. We didn't talk much. She made tea, handed me a mug with both hands, and sat beside me in silence. I don't remember if I drank it. Just remember the heat of the ceramic and the hum of the refrigerator. It was close to midnight when I finally said it out loud. She meant it. Mom, too. This time, they both meant it. Harper didn't reply, and I didn't need her to. I turned off my phone that night, but not before the first missed call lit up the screen. Back then, I didn't know it would be 13 by morning. I also didn't know that just a week before it all unraveled, I had nearly convinced myself that maybe things were turning around. It started with Vera's voice at the edge of the hallway. "Mom's doing a charity brunch for the community center next weekend. You want to help coordinate?" I blinked at her, unsure if I'd misheard. "You want me there?" She rolled her eyes. "I didn't say headline it, Arlena, just help." Still, it was the first time in months she asked me to do anything other than move my car. So I said yes. I showed up early, hair done, heels a bit too much for folding chairs and buffet trays, but I wanted to look like someone you didn't forget to mention. That morning, Vera handed me a clipboard like I belonged. I even smiled genuinely, for the first time in longer than it'd admit. Guests arrived in waves, old neighbors, donors, 2 retired teachers from our high school. I greeted people, directed them to seats, smiled until my cheeks ached. One older gentleman, Mr. Headley, approached with a kind grin. "Well, if it isn't Vanessa," he chuckled, patting my arm. I froze. "It's Arlena," I corrected gently. He blinked. "Ah, my mistake. You girls look more and more alike these days." We didn't. Later, I found a stack of printed invitations near the check-in table. The line beneath the event title read, "Hosted by Clara Whitmore and Vera Whitmore and guest." I laughed at first, a dry kind of laugh that stayed in the throat. I told myself it was probably a print error, but it echoed louder than I wanted. Things didn't get better once the speeches began. Vera stood confidently beside Clara, microphone in hand, glowing under soft stage lights. She spoke about legacy, about the importance of roots and community, and then about a memory. "When I was 10, Vera said, I entered the Northwest Young Writers Competition. Dad helped me revise my story, remember, Mom? And when I won, we drove all the way to Portland to accept the award." People clapped. Clara smiled, nodding along, but I couldn't breathe. That wasn't her story. It was mine. I remember the night I stayed up until 2 a.m., asking Dad to read my 5th revision. I remember how Vera didn't care, how she'd rolled her eyes at me hunched over the desk. And I remember Dad whispering, "They'll remember this one, sweetheart." But now they clapped for her, and I sat at the back of the room, watching a piece of my childhood pass hands like it never belonged to me. After the event, I pulled Vera aside in the foyer while people milled around with paper cups of lukewarm coffee. "Why would you tell that story?" I asked quietly. She didn't even blink. "You really think you earned that win? You wouldn't have even finished that story if Mom hadn't begged me to help you clean up the ending." "That's not true." She leaned closer. Everything you have, you owe us. You're just living off what we built. Behind her, Clara hovered nearby, listening. I waited for her to say something. To correct the record, to protect the daughter she always called her quiet one. But Clara turned away, offering a polite nod to someone walking by. That night, I sat in my car outside Harper's place. The windows fogged slightly, though I wasn't cold. I didn't knock, didn't go inside, just stared at myself in the rearview mirror. What if Vera was right? What if none of it had ever been mine? Memories are fragile things. Twist them enough times, and even the person who lived them starts to forget where the truth ends and the lie begins. I drove home before midnight. My apartment was still and dim. I dropped my purse by the door, kicked off my shoes, and stood at the edge of my bedroom. I'd packed a weekend bag, expecting I might stay with Harper after the brunch. I unpacked it, folded everything neatly, slid it back into the closet like it had never moved. Maybe I was being too sensitive, I whispered aloud, though no one was listening. But something deep beneath that sentence already knew this wasn't the first rewrite, and it wouldn't be the last. 3 days before I left, I stepped back into the house I used to call home. Vera had texted that morning, asking for a USB drive with some files from an old project we worked on years ago, something I'd kept because she hadn't. The tone of her message was uncharacteristically polite. I took that as a sign of goodwill. I shouldn't have. The living room smelled like polish and lilacs. Someone had been through here recently, probably a cleaner. Everything looked curated, almost staged. I moved toward the fireplace, glancing at the mantel, and froze. The photo, that same family portrait Wed taken in Yellowstone. Dad had insisted we dress like we weren't miserable cockies, matching shirts, fake laughs. It was staged and awkward, but it was one of the last pictures of all 4 of us together. Except now it was 8. The print over the mantel was a larger version, but something was off. I took a step closer. Vera, center. Clara next to her. Dad on the right, hand resting on Vera's shoulder. The far left, where I remembered standing with my arm looped awkwardly behind Vera's, back gone. Cropped out. The background extended just enough to fill the space where I'd once been. My stomach dipped. I reached for my phone and opened the original in my gallery. I'd saved it years ago in a folder called Things Worth Keeping. I held it up to the framed version. Same date, same outfits, same trees in the background. Just one person missing. Me. I didn't say anything. I just stood there staring at that empty space like it might give me a reason. Upstairs, I heard movement. Laundry being folded, drawers opening and closing. I followed the sound, driven less by curiosity and more by the hollow feeling spreading in my chest. My old room wasn't mine anymore. The paint was the same, but the energy had shifted. Vera stood inside, folding towels. On the back of my old desk chair hung a soft blue satin dress. I knew that fabric. I'd picked it out myself. Dad had it tailored for me for my 28th birthday. "Where'd you find that?" I asked, voice low but steady. She didn't look up. "It was in storage. I had it taken in." "You had it?" "What?" "You haven't worn it in years," she said, like that explained everything. "That wasn't yours to alter," I said. The edges of my voice frayed. Vera shrugged. "It's not like he's here to care anymore." That line did more damage than she probably intended, or maybe exactly what she meant it to. Clara appeared in the doorway just then, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. She glanced between us and offered a strained smile. "Tea's on," she said. "Why don't you both come downstairs?" I waited for something else. An acknowledgement. Even a look in my direction that hinted she'd noticed what just happened. Nothing came. Her face was as still as the photo downstairs framed, unmoved, adjusted to fit the narrative. I left without a word. In the driveway, I sat in my car for a long time. The interior was warm from the afternoon sun, but I felt cold. My fingers trembled slightly on the steering wheel. I turned the engine over, then off. Just sat there. They're not just taking space, I whispered to no one. They're rewriting the story. I saw Dad's handwriting flash through my memory, his note in the back of my old poetry journal. Memories are how we protect what matters. What happens when the people around you start sanding the edges off your life until even you can't be sure what was ever real? I drove back to my apartment slowly, stopping once for gas I didn't really need. I needed the pause more than the fuel. The silence. That night, I pulled out the old hard drive I hadn't touched in over a year. It clicked to life with a slow hum. I created a new folder and labeled it Proof. I copied photozones with me in them, emails, screenshots, text threads, a voice memo from Dad saved from my 25th birthday. I wasn't planning to use them, not yet. But if they were going to erase me, I wanted to have something that said I'd existed, even if the only person who ever looked at it again was me. 2 days before everything fell apart, I received an envelope in the mail. Heavy stock, embossed lettering Clara's style, of course. Inside was an invitation to the Eugene Historical Society's 50th anniversary gala. The line at the bottom read, "Hosted by Ms. Vera Whitmore and guest." I read it twice. No mention of me. Not the Whitmore family. Not even Arlena Whitmore. Just and guest. The implication landed with the same chill I felt opening that front door for a stranger. Still, Harper urged me to go. "Show up," she said. "Look good. Remind them you don't disappear just because they forget to say your name." So I went. The event was held in the downtown Civic Hall. Rows of chairs lined the stage, glass pitchers sweating on long tables. I recognized most of the guest donors, retired teachers, board members who used to call me the sweet one. I stepped in, heels clicking against polished wood, and smiled like I was happy to be there. But even before Vera took the podium, I felt it. She spoke effortlessly, her voice warm and composed, radiating poise the way she always did when there was something at stake. The speech started harmless, acknowledging past board members, community leaders, even Clara. Then came the part that stung. "I remember driving across counties with Mom," Vera said, "delivering brochures by hand, going door to door, back when we were just starting the foundation." She paused, smiling. Clara beamed in return. That had been my idea, my beat-up Honda. My summer spent mapping routes on sticky notes and running into grocery stores for cold coffee and hand sanitizer. Vera had tagged along on one tripone, and now she'd lived it all? The audience clapped. I sat in the third row, nodding like I agreed with a version of the truth that didn't include me. My hands had started trembling by the time I stood up. I slipped out the side door, past the caterer prepping dessert trays, and into the quiet hallway. I pulled the invitation from my bag and looked at it again. This time, I noticed something I hadn't before. Veronica, Clara, Whitmore, and guest. They'd even added her middle name, full legacy. I folded the card in half and slid it into the trash near the restroom. No drama, just done. But that wasn't the first time something like this had happened. A memory surfaced me at 11, nervously adjusting my shirt at a local library, holding my poem in sweaty fingers. I had won a regional writing contest. I remembered how Dad had grinned the whole way home, how Mom told the neighbors I really had a voice. Weeks later, I overheard Vera on the phone. "Yeah, Arlena and I worked on that poem together. I mean, I helped her clean up the rhythm, obviously. Clara had been in the kitchen. She hadn't corrected her. She never did." That's when the doubts began. Not loud, not all at once, but slow, subtle, like rot under paint. Backstage after the event, I found Vera by the refreshment table, sipping lemon water like she just accepted an award. No one else was around. I didn't plan what I said next, I didn't need to. "Why do you keep erasing me?" She blinked. "Jesus, Arlena. Grow up. You took my story again. You stood up there and gave away a memory that wasn't yours. You were always the delicate one," she said, setting her glass down. "We couldn't count on you to follow through. You cracked under pressure." I stared at her. "That wasn't your call to make." Vera leaned in, voice low. "You don't get to rewrite the past just because you want a bigger part in it." "No," I said. Steady now. You don't get to rewrite me just because you talked louder. She laughed, that sharp exhale she used when she wanted to dismiss me without getting her hands dirty. Then she walked away. Clara stepped in from the side hallway a moment later, holding a plate of untouched finger sandwiches. She must have heard at least the tail end. Did you hear what she said? I asked. Clara shifted the plate to her other hand. She didn't mean it like that. But you always mean it like that, I said. You mean it with silence. She didn't respond. That was the last time I waited for either of them to offer me a place at their table. I should have known it wasn't a real invitation the second Clara called it a check-in. That's what she always did when she wanted to sound warm, but deliver something cold. Her voice was steady, practiced too careful to be casual. Just come by, she said. It's time we talked through everything. I went the next afternoon around 4. The sky was that typical midwinter gray, flat and unbothered, but there was a weight in the air that hadn't been there before. It followed me up the walkway and settled deep in my chest the moment I stepped onto Clara's porch. Vera's car was already in the driveway, angled in like it belonged more than I did. Of course she was here. Of course they were doing this together. Clara opened the door, all efficiency and coolness. No hug, no smile, just a tight nod and a wave inward, like I was a courier dropping off forms. Vera was already seated at the dining table, a thick folder laid out in front of her. I didn't even need to see the embossed gold logo to know it was from the family attorney. I'd seen that same font on the documents when Dad died. Clara motioned toward the empty chair across from them. We've made a few updates to the estate plan. It's nothing urgent, just clarifications. I didn't move. I just stood there, still in my coat, letting the silence stretch. Vera pushed the folder across the polished table. It's simpler this way. The properties will be transferred into my name, fewer legal hurdles later. I looked at Clara, searching for some trace of discomfort, maybe even guilt. Is that what this is? A simplification? She avoided my eyes. You'll still receive a cash portion. It's not large, but meaningful. And what about the power of attorney? Clara paused, then gave a diplomatic half-smile. We thought it might be overwhelming. You've had a lot going on lately. There it was. The careful wording, the professional courtesy cloaking the personal decision. I let out a slow breath. Did either of you ask how that would feel? Vera crossed her arms and leaned back. You're too emotional for those decisions, Arlena. That sentence, that exact phrase or some version of it had been thrown at me for years. It always landed the same, sharp, minimizing, permanent. But this time, it came with paperwork. Clara stood and moved to the cabinet along the wall. She opened the top drawer and returned with a small, time-worn envelope, its edges yellowed, the paper soft with age. She placed it on the table between us. I found this while cleaning out the upstairs closet, she said gently. It's the letter you wrote me when you were 19. You tucked in money from your first job. I stared at the handwriting on the front. My own. Clara gave a nostalgic smile, as if this was some heartfelt moment. You don't need to hold on to things like this. It's not necessary. She hadn't even opened it. I reached out slowly, picked up the envelope, and slipped it into my purse. My hand lingered there for a moment, part grief, part resolve. Silence fell over the room, but it wasn't empty. It was dense, humming with things left unsaid. Then something in me shifted. My voice came out low, steady, cold. You've made your choices, I said, and I won't fight you for a seat at a table you already cleared of me. Clara blinked. Don't be dramatic. No one's pushing you out. I looked from one sister to the other. I'm not being dramatic. I'm just done underreacting. I picked up the folder Vera had slid across the table and handed it back to her untouched. I don't need this, I said. Vera let out a frustrated sigh. You always make things harder than they have to be. And yet, I said, slipping my arms into my coat. I'm still the quiet one between us. Neither of them moved. Neither of them said goodbye. I walked out with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years, a kind of deliberate calm. Like every step was another nail in a coffin that should have been sealed a long time ago. And this time, I didn't glance back. Once inside my car, I sat with the engine off and my keys in hand. The hedge beside the driveway caught my eye, the same one I used to hide in as a child when I needed space to cry. Or to dream. I used to imagine it was a secret passage to a better life. Maybe, in some way, it still was. I pulled out my phone and dialed Harper. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, you okay?" I stared at the unopened envelope on the seat beside me. My younger self, folded into paper. "I need your help," I said. "With what?" "I'm going to start collecting everything. Photos, emails, letters, screenshots. Anything that shows I was here, that I counted, that I mattered." There was a pause. "To what end?" I looked at the steering wheel, then back at the envelope. I thought about everything it swallowed for the sake of peace. Everything I let slide so I wouldn't seem difficult. Emotional. Too much. "To remind them I existed," I said quietly. "Before I prove it." The morning I left, I wasn't supposed to be awake that early. Sleep had only half worked its magic after the conversation with Clara and Vera. My chest still felt tight, like my ribs had forgotten how to hold anything but hurt. I rolled over, planning to bury myself for another hour, but then came the ping. I wasn't expecting much, probably a newsletter or some spam, but my eyes caught the subject line, "Final Edits Approved Tribute Video." It was part of an email thread between Vera and a public relations contractor. I wasn't supposed to be copied. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The tone was professional, the exchange efficient, but halfway down the thread, it hit. "Make sure Arlena's part isn't included in the final cut," Vera had written. "We've already aligned the messaging." A reply followed quickly. "Understood." Replacing with extended Vera clip. I read it again, then a third time. I should have been furious. I should have thrown the laptop across the room. But I just sat there, frozen. Like my body knew this wasn't news, just confirmation. A silent erasure, handled in plain sight. The tribute video. Clara's milestone birthday. That ridiculous garden party full of lanterns and curated nostalgia. I'd spent hours filming my segment, pulling the curtains just right to catch golden light, repeating takes because my voice kept cracking. I'd even cried once, talking about how she used to read to us under the jacaranda tree, and it never aired. Not because it didn't land, because Vera had deleted me again. By noon, I was at Harper's place. I didn't say much, just showed up with my laptop and the kind of silence that makes good friends wordless. She opened the door, looked at me once, and cleared her dining table without a word. "Check the shared drive," I managed to say, my voice flat. "Vera sent it to me months ago." I never looked. We found it after some digging buried underfolders named Legacy Content and Final Assets. The wheel spun forever, and then it loaded. Family timeline. Inside was a trash folder, and there it was. Arlena birthday clip final.move. Still intact. Still timestamped. Still me. Harper backed it up like it was national treasure, 2 hard drives, 1 cloud, even a burner email address I'd forgotten ever creating. She turned to me. "What do you want to do with it?" I looked at the file. The name. The version of me they decided didn't fit. "Keep it," I said, "for now." Back home, I didn't unpack. I didn't eat. I didn't scroll away the feeling. Instead, I made space, cleared the clutter from my desk, wiped it down with an old dish towel, and opened a blank folder on my screen. The rewrite. Inside, I began to place the evidence. Not to punish them. Not even to demand anything. Just so that, finally, anyone would see it wasn't all in my head. I added a cropped version of the Yellowstone photo, where it'd been cut off at the shoulder, the birthday invitation, the one where my name was missing, the tribute video, my voice, my memories, my face, screenshots of Vera's email thread with the PR vendor, a scanned PDF of the estate paperwork Clara quietly handed me last fall. The envelope I'd never sent my 19-year-old self's letter to Clara, sealed but unread. I dragged each item into the folder like placing bones in a display case. They had their version. This was mine. I didn't feel angry anymore, not in the fire-breathing way people expect. I was something else. Resolved, unhooked. Harper texted me around 8. "You good?" I stared at it for a while, then typed back, "I'm about to be." I opened a new message window. No salutation, no sign-off. Just 2 attachments, the tribute video, a screenshot of Vera's instruction to erase me. And then I addressed the email not to Vera, not even to Clara, but to the people who mattered most in their world. Clara's nonprofit board, her closest donors, the foundation's media consultant. Subject line, "This was her daughter too." I stared at the send button, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to remember the stillness right before. Then I clicked. No fire, no thunder, just truth, quiet and final. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city pulsed taillights, porch lights, apartments blinking on one by one. Life, indifferent but alive. They could keep pretending I was never part of the story. But not this time. This time, I wrote it down. The magazine was everywhere. I hadn't planned to see it. I'd only stopped at the coffee shop for a quick cup before heading home. But there it was. A fresh stack of glossy covers at the register, proudly displayed like some kind of local gospel. Clara and Vera stood side by side on the cover, both in crisp pastels, arms gently linked, smiles carefully measured. "The women behind the legacy," the headline read. I didn't pick it up at first, just stared at the pile like it might catch fire if I looked long enough. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it with the care you reserve for something that might break you. The feature was glowing. Paragraph after paragraph about their tireless work building the foundation, launching initiatives, nurturing a family legacy of female leadership. I scanned for my name. Nothing. Not even a footnote. And then came the kicker: Vera, quoted as the sole visionary behind the scholarship fund I had drafted, named, and fought to establish when no one else thought it was worth the trouble. I sat down at the nearest table and stared at the page, the steam from my coffee curling upward like it couldn't stand the company either. Within the hour, my phone buzzed with messages. "Just saw the article. So proud of your family. Didn't know you stepped back. Must have been hard." And the one that finally made me put the phone face down. "Vera really carried things, huh?" I texted Harper. I didn't step back. I got shoved. By late afternoon, I was parked outside Clara's place. The sky had shifted into a muted blue, clouds rolling over like they knew what was coming. I walked in without knocking. She was in the sunroom, watering plants. Vera wasn't there. I didn't wait to exchange pleasantries. I made my way to the hallway that once displayed our childhood art back when Clara pretended to be proud of both of us. And then I saw it. The painting I made at 14. Deep navy swirls, flecks of gold, brush strokes I still remembered wrestling into place. Dad used to call it my voice without words. Now, it hung in a polished wooden frame with Vera's name signed neatly in the bottom corner. I stood in front of it, the air gone thin. "You knew that was mine," I said quietly. Clara appeared behind me. "I thought you wouldn't care. It's been years." I turned to her. "So because I stopped asking for space, you assumed I didn't deserve any." She opened her mouth but said nothing. I walked toward the bookshelf, letting my eyes scan for other ghosts. And there they were, 2 awards I'd received in college, now displayed as part of a timeline exhibit Vera had arranged in the hallway. Only her name was listed on the tags. "This isn't about memory anymore," I said. "It's about intent." Clara didn't look at me. "You're not just letting her rewrite everything," I said. "You're helping her do it." There was nothing left to salvage in that room. I didn't yell, didn't cry, just took out my phone and snapped a picture of the painting. Then another of the mislabeled awards. That night, I sat in my apartment, lights dimmed, silence thick. I opened a new email, addressed it to the editor of the magazine. No greeting, just attachments. Side-by-side scans of my original scholarship proposal and the published version Vera had submitted months later with subtle edits. But all my structure. The timestamps were clear. The signatures, not hers. I included the painting photo, attached a digital version of the same art from a decade-old hard drive, same name, same brush patterns, with my signature digitally embedded from back then. Subject: you might want to fact-check your front page. I didn't sign it. I didn't have to. By morning, the article was gone from the magazine's website. No correction, no apology. But I knew Clara's inbox was catching heat. Harper forwarded me a screenshot from a board member asking, "Why wasn't Arlena listed?" Another said, "Can we confirm authorship of the fund language?" I didn't need them to respond. I just needed the silence that followed to be theirs for once, not mine. I hadn't planned on checking my phone again that night. After the magazine pulled the article and silence filled the void Vera once used to control every conversation, I'd expected peace. Or at least quiet. But peace is never what it seems when it comes from people who built their comfort on your exclusion. The screen lit up around 10:17 p.m. Vera's name flashed, followed by a single message. Shell spiral. Let her. No one believes her anyway. No greeting. No punctuation. And more importantly, no name. Just she. It wasn't for me. Clearly meant for Clara. But it landed in my inbox anyway. I stared at the message for a long time, unsure if I felt more insulted by the words, or the fact that, even in private, I was never granted the decency of a name. She. Like I was a storm they could watch from a window. Like I didn't live inside the house, too. I didn't respond. Instead, I stepped outside Harper's apartment. The porch light buzzed overhead, casting a faint halo across the sidewalk. I paced the driveway once, twice, trying to keep my breath steady. Harper came out a minute later, arms folded under her hoodie. "She sent it to you?" she asked, already knowing. "Wrong thread, maybe," I muttered. "Right target." She waited, giving me space to sort the words I didn't know how to say. "They never saw me as part of this family," I finally said. "Just someone to contain. To quiet down." Harper didn't interrupt. "I'm not going back," I added. "Not even for closure. Because there's nothing left to close." Later, we sat on her couch, half a mug of lukewarm tea between us. She went digging through an old drawer of tech junk, tossing out chargers and scratched-up thumb drives. Then she found ETA portable hard drive I'd forgotten I gave her years ago when I was clearing out my childhood desk. "I don't know if it still works," she said. It did. The files loaded slowly, but there it was. A folder labeled Letters That Didn't Need Stamps. Inside, a document titled, "For Arlenaev, I Don't Get to Say It." My hands trembled. I double-clicked. It was a draft email from Dad. Never sent, never printed, just saved. It read, "Sweetheart, I don't know when this will reach you, or if it ever should. But I see things. I see how Vera needs control more than closeness. I see how your mother fears friction more than injustice. And I see you. You were always the one who saw things clearly. That made you a threat, even in this house. You are not too much. You are not dramatic. You are feeling what others refuse to. Don't let them convince you otherwise. Don't let them make you forget who you are. You see more because you feel more." I sat there with his words glowing on the screen, my heart stretching to hold the weight of both pain and relief. I printed it. I didn't send it to anyone. Not yet. Instead, I added it to a folder on my laptop titled Not Forgotten, the same place where I'd stored the cropped photos, the deleted video, and every other piece of evidence they'd tried to erase. That night, I emailed just one thing to the community center: the original birthday tribute video, the same one Vera deleted from Clara's event. I offered it, without context, for their upcoming Women's History Month montage. No message, no backstory, only the file. My voice, my story, in full. The next afternoon, it aired quietly online. It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. Clara saw it. She texted Vera one word. Enough. I saw the read receipt. No reply came. I deleted Vera's accidental message after that, didn't respond, didn't screenshot it. Some things aren't meant to be held onto, even if they're handed to you directly. She expected me to burn down. I didn't. I lit the room instead. The next morning, the phone rang 13 times. I didn't answer. I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and created a blank document. Not a blog, not a letter, a manuscript. Page 1 read, "The Disappearing Daughter." The calls started just after sunrise. The phone lit up beside my bed, like it knew the day had changed shape before I did. The first came from Clara, then Vera, then an unknown number I knew better than to answer. I sat in bed, knees pulled up under the blanket, phone in my palm, listening to the voicemails one by one. Vera's voice, cracked and breathless. "Arlena, I don't know what you think you're doing. You need to stop before you ruin everything." Clara's message was slower, measured, almost rehearsed. "We'd like to speak, if you're open to it." We didn't realize the full extent. But the one that stayed with me was nearly silent. Just a faint sigh, followed by Clara's whisper. "I don't know where we lost you. I didn't save the messages." Later that morning, I pulled on a coat and walked to the river trail a few blocks from my apartment. The same one Dad used to take me to on weekends when we needed a break from the house, from the noise, from them. I tucked his unsent email in my inside pocket. Printed and folded once, it felt like an anchor against my chest. I didn't cry. I let my feet move with the rhythm of the water beside me, the quiet air pulling the tension out of my shoulders, word by word. "I am still here. I didn't vanish." That was the sentence I repeated, softly under my breath, like a spell. A truth I carved deeper with every step. When I returned, there was a package leaning against my front door. No return label, no note. Inside, the original family photo, uncropped. All four of us, standing stiffly in front of Yellowstone's jagged skyline. My arm was still awkwardly slung behind Vera's back. I remembered how we argued about where to stand that day, how Dad eventually said, "It's just a picture, girls." But it wasn't just a picture. It never was. Taped behind the frame was a folded piece of paper. I recognized the yellowing edges, the handwriting mine. It was the poem I'd written at 11. The one Clara pretended not to remember when Vera claimed it as a collaboration. She had kept it, quietly, tucked away. I didn't call to thank her. Some things don't need words. And Vera? She didn't call again. No apology, no explanation. But over the next few days, I saw her name disappear from several press releases, foundation pages, project credits, just gone or placed with the generic team or committee. I didn't feel triumphant. I just breathed a little easier. A week later, I spoke at a small community group downtown. A friend had asked me to talk about the role of story in personal identity. I almost said no, but I went. I didn't name names. I didn't dwell on betrayal. I told a simple truth. I was once erased, but I reappeared on my own terms. There was a long pause after I finished. Then one woman stood, eyes glassy, and said, "I've been waiting my whole life to hear someone say that." The following Monday, I signed a publishing contract with a small press out of Seattle. Nothing flashy, but real. The book was titled Disappeared, A Daughter's Undoing. On the dedication page, I wrote, "For anyone who needed proof they were real." Afterward, I closed the laptop, stretched my arms above my head, and padded barefoot into the kitchen. I boiled water, steeped tea, stood there watching the leaves swirl slowly. The apartment was quiet, but this quiet belonged to me. As sunlight slanted through the blinds, I glanced toward the windowsill. The photo sat there in a simple frame uncropped. Next to it, my father's email, printed on ivory paper, framed beside it. I didn't frame them to prove a point. I framed them to remember that I never needed to be louder. I just needed to stop waiting for someone else to say I mattered. The light hit both frames, then warmed my cheek, and I smiled. Small, but steady. Sometimes the people who silence us the most are the ones who claim to love us the loudest. I spent years trying to earn my place at a table that had already decided I didn't belong. But the truth is, your worth isn't up for vote, and your memories aren't optional. If you're someone who's ever been overlooked, rewritten, or made to feel small, know this. You don't need their permission to exist. You don't need to be louder, you just need to stand still long enough for your truth to echo. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt like your story was hijacked by someone else? Or that you had to prove you belonged in your own family? Tell me below. Drop a 1 if this story hit close to home, or just let me know where you're watching from. And if this video meant something to you, if it stirred something inside, or made you reflect, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories that speak to the heart, challenge the silence, and remind us that we're not alone. I'll be reading the comments. Let's keep the conversation going. Hi, I'm Maura. On my 33rd birthday, I got a text from my mother that said, "We sold your car. Your sister needed a new phone. Be grateful, no happy birthday, no explanation, just gone." But that was only the beginning. What would you do if you found out your own family forged your name on bank loans, drained your savings, erased you from family photos, and rewrote a will to give your inheritance to someone else? And worse, what if they made you feel like you were the problem the whole time? Would you fight back? Or would you let them keep writing your story for you? Tacoma never tries to be beautiful, it simply is. The gray, the mist, the cold it settles into you like a second skin. That afternoon, I drove home from the hospital in silence, windshield wipers cutting across a steady drizzle that had no intention of stopping. My 33rd birthday. I wasn't expecting streamers or balloons, but I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would remember. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as it always did. No extra cars, no porch light left on for a surprise. That was fine. I had a bottle of white chilling in the fridge and a leftover lasagna slice waiting. Quiet was something I'd learned to live with. Inside, I peeled off my hospital badge and scrubs, dropped them on the bathroom floor, and stepped into sweats. My phone buzzed as I was tying my hair into a loose knot. A message from Mom. "Sold your car. Callista needed a new phone. Be grateful we still feed you." The air left my lungs. I blinked, certain it was a mistake. Another message came through before I could respond. "You're being dramatic. It's just a car." My knees gave slightly, but I steadied myself on the bathroom counter. Then I moved fast. Out the front door, barefoot, the concrete wet under my feet. The driveway? Empty. My car? Gone. The Civic I bought after 2 years of double shifts, paid off in full 6 months ago. Gone. I stepped back inside. The living room was warm, smelled faintly of toasted bread. Veramy mother sat at the kitchen island, legs crossed, scrolling through her iPad, like she hadn't just detonated a bomb through text. "Where's my car?" I asked. She didn't look up. "You didn't really need it, did you? You work 10 minutes away." "I needed it because it was mine." She laughed, like it said something funny. "Don't be so selfish. Your sister's got that sponsorship thing in LA. She needs to look the part." I didn't answer. I knew if I stayed, I'd say something I couldn't unsay. I walked past her and upstairs, shutting the door behind me. Dinner was silent. I sat alone at the table, stabbing at a microwaved plate of whatever was left in the fridge. No cake, no card. No one even said happy birthday. Callista, my younger sister, was in Palm Springs for a content shoot. She posted 3 outfit changes before noon and a photo of the new phone with a glittering caption, "Blessed, thank you, fam." I guess I was fam. Halfway through dinner, Vera passed behind me and muttered, "We can't let you hold your sister back. She's the one who needs to make it." I didn't respond. I stared at the wall. That wall still had Callista's high school dance trophy, her prom queen sash, a framed print from her first brand deal. Nothing of mine. I walked upstairs. My old bedroom was half storage now. Boxes lined the corners, mostly labeled Misk, Holiday, or Callista's old stuff. I crouched near the far wall, where I kept an old shoebox under my dresser. Inside were folded receipts, the car title, insurance documents, the last payment confirmation. Every single page had my name on it. Every dollar came from my account. I sat back on the floor, holding that shoebox like it was the last part of me that made sense. Fury roiled in my chest, hot and controlled. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't betrayal. It was theft disguised as family. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. My mind played through old scenes like a movie reel. When I was 18, my college fund disappeared because Dad had to refinance the house. When I landed an internship in Seattle, my celebration dinner was canceled because Callista had cheerleading finals. No one apologized. They just told me I was so understanding. "You're the strong one. She needs support." For years, that was the mantra, spoken with affection, as if I should wear it like a badge of honor. All it did was turn me into a ghost in my own home. That night, as the rain finally slowed outside my window, I picked up my phone and opened the Notes app. I typed a new title, "Everything They Took." First entry, Honda Civic paid in full. Gone. Second, college fund rerouted. Third, my birthday. I kept going. The first name missing was mine. On the wall, on the bank account, on every family photo that stayed framed. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I told the hospital I had an urgent personal matter. They didn't ask questions after all. I rarely called out. The air outside was wet and bitter, the kind of spring chill that seeped under your sleeves before you could curse it. Instead of coffee, I went straight to the garage. It still smelled like oil and forgotten Christmas decorations. Under the far shelf, in a plastic bin I hadn't touched since I moved back, was the filing box I needed. Inside, every folded paper, every stamped receipt, every signature I'd collected over 5 years of car payments waited patiently to remind me. This was never theirs to take. I pulled out the title, clean and final. Loan payoff confirmation. Purchase invoice. Insurance documents. My name was on every line. I stood there, paper in hand, and something in my chest shifted. The ache from yesterday wasn't gone, it had evolved. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was theft. Downstairs, Vera was at the stove, flipping eggs like it was any other Tuesday. She didn't glance up as I entered the kitchen, barefoot on cold tile. I laid the car title on the counter beside her coffee mug. "You sold something that never belonged to you." She turned the bacon. It was a contribution to the family. My voice didn't rise. "Then this family owes a receipt." She scoffed. "You're overreacting. It's just a car. You walk to work." I leaned in slightly, just enough for her to hear me over the sizzle. "You didn't take my keys. You took my name." She paused, for the first time, like it said something she hadn't scripted for. But it passed. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked away, leaving the eggs burning. Later that day, as I sat at the dining table, sorting documents into manila folders, my phone buzzed. FaceTime. Callista. I debated answering, but curiosity won. Her face popped up, glowing from perfect Scottsdale lighting. "Hey, birthday girl, I just saw your messages." "Wait, they sold your car?" I said nothing. She blinked dramatically. "That's wild. I thought it was like a shared car." "It wasn't," I replied. She paused, gave a pouty look to the camera. "Well, if it really means that much to you, I'll give you mine. I can Uber until my next shoot." I smiled. Not because I believed her, but because I finally saw it. How easy it was for her to offer what wasn't hers either. "No need. I walk just fine." She laughed like it was a joke, told me she had to go to a poolside networking thing, and the screen went black. Back in my room, I opened my laptop. I started a spreadsheet and named it Assets Paid, Assets Taken. Row 1, 2017 Honda Civic, $21,630. Row 2, iPhone 14 Pro, $1,099. Row 3, birthday, 33rd, 0. Net loss, pride. I scanned each receipt and uploaded PDFs. I photographed the title, the loan closure letter, the maintenance log I'd kept diligently like a badge of adulthood. File name, Wexley Theft, archive.pdf. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. About reclaiming something that had been slowly shaved away over years of being the responsible one. That night, I ate alone again. But I wasn't small. I wasn't invisible. I watched headlights pass through the blinds, and thought about how many women like me sat in silence at tables they paid for, next to people who pretended they owed nothing. I stared at the empty driveway. You thought I'd just let it slide. Watch me document every theft in ink. You don't truly notice erasure until you go looking for evidence that you ever mattered. I stopped by the house that morning under the pretense of grabbing a few old files from the hall closet. It was still early, quiet enough to make you believe people were kind. I stepped inside without knocking. No one called out, and I didn't call for them either. That kind of familiarity had already faded. As I passed through the living room, something caught my eye, subtle absence in the family photo wall. There had been a space, right between Callista's prom portrait and a shot of her with a dolphin in Cabo, where my graduation photo used to hang. It was gone. In its place was a glossy, framed photo of Callista parasailing in Mexico, all smiles and sun. Professionally printed, centered, perfectly lit. I stood still for a long minute. Then I made my way to the kitchen. Vera stood at the counter, pouring cereal into a bowl like she was auditioning for a commercial. She didn't look up. She never really did. "Where's my graduation photo?" I asked, voice flat. She didn't pause. It was outdated. The new one adds more color to the wall. My jaw clenched. That photo was mine. She shrugged. "It's not like we threw it away. It's probably in one of the drawers." I nodded, turned, and walked out. No fight, no breakdown. But inside, something moved. Not the raw wound from losing something, but the dull press of knowing it was deliberate. Back at my apartment, I pulled out my phone and opened the shared family photo album. I scrolled. And scrolled. There I was, 2 years ago, smiling beside Callista at Thanksgiving. And then, less. Fewer appearances. Then, none. Photos from family gatherings, where I was holding the camera, but never in front of it. Birthdays I hadn't been invited to. Weddings where my RSVP was pending because no one bothered to ask. It wasn't deletion. It was quiet replacement. A slow fade into the background, like they hoped it'd vanish without complaint. That night, I was folding laundry when Jess texted. Jess had been my friend since high school, the kind of person who never deleted old files or changed her number. "Look what I found." This popped up on my external backup drive. "Remember this?" She sent a link. A video. I tapped it, heart already tight. It was my 26th birthday. I hadn't remembered much of that day until the footage started playing. I stood in front of our family and a few neighbors in the backyard, holding a paper plate of cake. I had just started thanking everyone, voice shaky but trying. Then, before I could finish the second sentence, my father's voice cut in. "Let's save time, Callista just signed a modeling contract. Can we get a round of applause?" The camera turned. Everyone clapped. I vanished off screen. The video ended there. I watched it again. And again. Not out of disbelief, but because something in me needed confirmation. Not just that it had happened, but that I hadn't imagined the pattern. That I had been removed, one story at a time. I opened my notes app. Footage from 26th birthday. Timeline of dismissal. Confirmed. The next morning, I returned to the house with a framed copy of my college acceptance letter. It was still in the manila envelope from the university, edges curled with age. I stood in front of the family photo wall and, with deliberate calm, placed it next to the parasailing shot. No announcement, no grand gesture, just that. Later that day, Aunt Lenora came by to drop off something. She noticed it immediately. She didn't say a word, just nodded. That was enough. And once I saw how deep the rot went, I knew I couldn't unsee it or pretend it wasn't aimed at me. The first warning came in the form of a declined transaction. I was trying to pay my internet bill, same account I'd always used. Declined. I checked the number again, tried a different card, same message. My stomach didn't drop this time. It hardened. Back home, I logged into my online banking. What I saw wasn't just suspicious, it was surgical. My personal savings had been sliced with quiet precision. Transfers labeled vaguely. Family emergency. Household rebalance. Callista fund. And there, Glowing like a slap in my face was a new joint account listed under Household Langley. My name was tagged as co-owner. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't signed anything, but someone had. That afternoon, I walked into my local branch and asked to speak with a manager. I'd been with this bank since college. They knew me. The woman, polite and pleasant, clicked through the screen. She frowned. "It looks like this account was opened a few months ago, Mom, with your father as primary. He brought a letter authorizing the connection, signed by you." My voice stayed level. "Can I see the letter?" She printed it. The signature at the bottom looked like a child trying to mimic cursive. Not even close. My name bent at odd angles, ink too dark like someone pressed too hard while copying. I thanked her, folded it carefully, and slid it into my leather folder, already full of dates and receipts that proved one thing: this wasn't neglect. It was design. Back at my apartment, the rain had returned, tapping against the windows like a metronome for dread. I pulled up my credit report. There it was. A personal loan. $21,000. Taken out in my name 6 months ago. Auto payments linked to that new joint account had been made consistently, never missed. It looked clean, responsible, like I was building credit. The kind of lie that could pass as truth until you peeled back the page. I stared at the screen for a long time, then picked up my phone and texted Nina, a friend from college who now worked as a paralegal. She replied within minutes. "Come by in the morning." Well, sort it. That evening, I sat on my couch with a yellow legal pad not to vent, but to list. The full scope: $21,000 loan, forged signature for joint account, multiple transfers from personal funds. No consent, no notification. The pen trembled in my hand, but not from fear. From control. I wasn't breaking. I was building something one line item at a time. The next morning, I met Nina in her office downtown. She didn't flinch when I handed her the paperwork. She just nodded. "This is fraud, identity theft technically. But when it's family, it gets complicated." I exhaled. "What do I do?" "First credit freeze, then file an incident report with the Bureau. You can request a forensic signature analysis too." She looked at me. "If this were anyone else, Maura, you'd have sued already." I didn't answer. But I was done thinking blood excused betrayal. That night, I sat in bed with a cup of tea and my journal. Not the one I wrote feelings in, the one I used to remember who I was before people tried to edit me. I flipped back to a quote Vera had written in my freshman yearbook: "She's strong. She always figures it out." I wrote beneath it, "Strength is not letting them rewrite your name on a loan you never asked for." The following evening, I showed up for dinner. Same table, same air of passive civility. No one mentioned the account. No one acknowledged the missing money. But when I passed Vera in the hallway, she paused. Her eyes met mine, just for a second. She knew. Harlan said grace that night. I kept my head bowed, but I wasn't praying. I was memorizing the silence. How thick it felt, how much it said. They didn't know what I'd uncovered, but they could feel it in my posture. I wasn't angry anymore. I was prepared. I knew they wouldn't stop, not because they needed to destroy me, but because they needed to keep the version of themselves they sold to everyone else. Vanessa picked the calf. I hadn't seen her in a few years, maybe since her wedding. Downtown Tacoma had its usual buzz brunch crowds, people walking dogs in puffer vests. I arrived early, and she was already there, stirring iced tea and not meeting my eyes. We caught up about nothing. Work, weather, the quality of espresso these days. Then she cleared her throat and said, "I need to tell you something." I waited. "Your parents opened a Macy's credit line under my name. It was about 6 years ago." Everything inside me froze. She rushed to explain. I didn't say anything because I was scared. I got a call from collections, and when I confronted them, they said it was an error. I didn't press charges. I didn't want to cause drama. I felt myself nodding, not because I understood, but because I recognized the pattern. They had used her, too. Vanessa, the girl who once braided my hair before prom. She didn't owe me an apology. I still whispered, "I'm sorry." She gave a small smile. "I figured you didn't know, But maybe it's time you do. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table with a half glass of wine and a message from Aaron Callistas' ex-boyfriend. He and I had only spoken twice before, but his email was clipped, cold, and loaded. Subject: Things you deserve to know. Attached: screenshots of text exchanges between him and Vera, photos of receipts, even an invoice for social media consulting under a fake LLC Vera created to fund Callista's follower growth. The brand deals were fake. They bought followers, bought comments. Everything's been staged since 2020. The kicker? A check written from my name, forged, sent to a dealership to cover Callista's gifted car. Every curated post, every sparkle-infused caption built from my stolen credit. I stared at the screen for a long while. Then I opened a new document. Not legal, not evidence, a letter. I started writing, not to vent, but to clarify. You've built a house of mirrors, and I was the floor you walked on while painting the ceiling gold. Line after line, I dismantled the illusion they had constructed. How my identity had been bartered to buy perfection. I didn't plan to send it, but I printed it, folded it, and added it to my folder. A few days later, I drove to the house. No plan for an ambush. I just wanted to speak, to finally set the record straight. Dinner was over. The table cleared. Vera was folding a napkin when I walked in. "Maura!" she beamed. "You should have told me you were coming. I would have saved you a plate." I placed my folder on the counter. "If you touch another document with my name on it, I will take it to court." Her smile twitched. "This is no longer emotional. It's legal." Harlan entered the room mid-sentence, froze. Callista trailed behind him and stopped in the doorway. No one moved. "I have copies. I have timestamps. Don't make me prove it to people who don't already love you." Vera scoffed. "We made you who you are. Don't forget that." I took a step closer. "If that were true, you wouldn't need to lie about it." I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't raise my voice. That kind of noise always served them more than me. The air outside smelled like salt and leaves. Autumn was coming early. Back at home, I renamed the file on my desktop from Wexley Theft Archive.pdf to Wexley Truth Timeline PDF, because this wasn't just about what they took anymore. It was about what they couldn't erase. That night, I backed up everything to a hard drive, the old one I'd labeled Private Archives in black marker years ago, when I still thought keeping evidence was about self-preservation. This time, it wasn't just backup. It was preparation. I made 2 copies. One I kept in the desk drawer with a coded label. The second went into a fireproof box beneath my bed, alongside the deed to my condo and a sealed letter I hadn't opened in 6 years. I wasn't paranoid. I was precise. The loan rejection came quietly, on a Tuesday. I'd applied for a short professional development course, 6 weeks, online, employer-sponsored. Barely a speed bump in my schedule. It was supposed to be a stepping stone, a simple checkmark on my career roadmap. When the decline email arrived, I blinked. Surely it was a typo, a glitch. Maybe the system didn't process my income verification properly. But no, the denial was real, and so was the reason. I called the credit bureau, expecting a robotic voice. What I got was worse. A calm, almost too kind woman who spoke like she'd read this script 1,000 times. "Your application was denied due to a sudden increase in open accounts and revolving debt," she said. "Would you like me to go over the details with you?" "Yes," I whispered, though part of me already knew. As she read off account after account I hadn't opened, a pit grew in my stomach. "Were you aware of this activity?" "No," I answered, voice flat. "But I know who did it." She didn't respond. Just a pause. Then a muted breath, like she was reminding herself not to get involved. That night, I sat in silence at my dining table, surrounded by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the low buzz of a world that kept spinning while mine quietly tilted. The rejection letter stayed open on my laptop screen, still glowing when the courier knocked. A thick envelope, overnighted, from Nina. Inside, a printed check, scanned and folded. My name typed at the top, my signature at the bottom. But it wasn't my signature, It was an imitation a ghost of my old handwriting, the way I used to sign birthday cards in high school. The curve of the M, the loop on the S so familiar it made my stomach turn. Someone had copied not my style now, but a version of me they still remembered. Or thought they did. The check had paid for a brand new iPhone. Top of the line. The same one Callista had shown off on Instagram last week, with a caption that read, "Milestone vibes. Thanks, universe." In the memo line of the check, in a handwriting that clearly wasn't mine. "Happy milestone, darling." I didn't cry. My hands shook a little, but my breath stayed even. I didn't rage. I reached for a pushpin, one more proof. I pinned the check on my corkboard next to the bank transfer printouts, the flagged email from Vanessa about the department store credit card, and a screenshot from my birthday video that had haunted me since January. This wasn't an outburst. This was architecture. I opened my laptop again. No hesitation this time. Subject, cease and desist. Notice of intent body. Effective immediately, you are instructed to reverse all unauthorized use of my name, identity, and financial instruments. Continued violation will result in legal action, both civil and criminal. This is not emotional. It is a matter of law. No salutation, no farewell, just law. I hit send. Then I waited. Not for peace. For pattern. Hours passed. One text arrived, from Vera. "You're overreacting." I didn't reply. I walked to the drawer beside the filing cabinet, pulled out my external hard drive, and connected it. It whirred to life, a slow hum, like the calm before a storm. I began copying everything. Financial records, screenshots, PDFs, voice recordings, receipts, statements, even texts I'd screenshotted out of instinct but never thought I'd need. I labeled the new master folder, Wexley Legal Master. Then I made tea, sat on the floor, and turned my living room into a war room. Sticky notes, tabs, highlighters, manila envelopes, color-coded files. I wasn't scared. I wasn't desperate. I was building a timeline. My grandfather Wexley used to say over morning coffee, long before he passed. Some folks only understand truth when it's notarized. The next morning, I got up early and walked to the notary's office on Broadway. No dramatic music, no storm clouds, just the quiet certainty of someone who knows their case is airtight. I presented my ID, signed 3 affidavits, watched the notary seal each document with the clinical grace of someone who's witnessed 100 small wars in ink. When I got home, I renamed the file Wexley v. Langley Exhibit Master. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about getting them to believe me. It was about having the kind of proof no one could edit, manipulate, or gaslight out of existence. This time, I wasn't documenting to be heard. I was documenting to defend. And this time, I wasn't going to lose. I wasn't just preparing a folder, was building a fortress. The message arrived just after midnight, when most decent people are asleep, and the rest are looking for truth. I didn't recognize the name at first, Aunt Ruth. She was my mother's cousin, technically, but always called herself my aunt. "Maura," the message read, "I don't know how much you know, but your grandfather left you something and it didn't vanish. It was taken." Attached was a PDF file, the original will. My name was listed clearly, right next to a modest trust fund set aside for education and first home expenses. Nothing extravagant, just something he believed would help me stand on my own. But it wasn't just the inclusion that caught my attention. It was the version below dated 6 months later. My name had been removed, replaced with Callista's. Ruth's final note read, "They told the family you gave it up. I didn't believe it then. I know better now." By the next morning, I was parked outside Lenora's place. She opened the door without asking why I was there. Her face said she already knew. We didn't sit. She walked to her filing cabinet, pulled out a green folder, and handed it to me. Inside, court paperwork, legal reassignment of the trust, filed by Vera. Grounds, beneficiary mentally unfit to manage finances, estranged from family unit. I stared at the page until the words blurred. They rewrote my future, I whispered. Lenora's voice was soft but resolute. But you can still reclaim it. That evening, I sat on the floor of my apartment, timeline folder open like a map of stolen things. I tore a sheet from the back of a notepad and wrote a new cover page. Assets I built. Assets they buried. I added the trust paperwork behind the credit fraud, the forged check, the erased images, the video from my 26th birthday. Then I opened a fresh page and wrote my will. It wasn't long, just enough to name myself. The next day, I walked into the State Financial Bureau with a copy of every document. I waited in line like any citizen. No special treatment. Just a woman carrying a story and the weight of stolen inheritance. The clerk skimmed the file, paused. This involves your parents? I didn't flinch. This involves perpetrators. I signed the statement, left my contact info, and walked out. As the doors swung shut behind me, it didn't feel like closure. It felt like a door slamming on someone else's story. That night, I was folding laundry when I heard the knock. Callista stood on the other side of the door, holding a folder. She looked smaller. Not thinner, not weaker, just less curated. I didn't know, she said, eyes already brimming. Mom said it was always mine. I didn't raise my voice, then ask her to prove it under oath. She didn't argue, didn't cry, just turned and walked away. And for the first time, I didn't wonder if she'd ever come back. Later, I added the new files from Ruth and Lenora to the folder. Then I opened my laptop, turned on the webcam, and hit record. I didn't dress it up, no makeup, no lighting tricks, just me, my words, my version. I named every action, every manipulation, every forgery. I showed documents, read out dates, and ended with a sentence I hadn't rehearsed. This is the version that will remain. That night, I slept for the first time in months. Not like someone victorious, but like someone unburdened. I didn't have to prove I was telling the truth anymore. I didn't have to convince people who had already decided I didn't matter. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't carry the weight of needing to be believed. The group text came the next morning. Thursday, from Vera. Family brunch this weekend at the house. Let's reconnect, for unity. The word unity made my stomach churn. As if we hadn't just spent the last 6 months buried in legal filings, forged documents, and whispered betrayal. Unity? After a hijacked trust and years of silent sabotage? Still, I didn't delete the message. I didn't respond either. Instead, I opened the file on my desktop financial misconduct, mw.pdf, and printed 5 clean copies. Each was clipped neatly, labeled at the top in bold font. Timeline of Financial Misconduct, Maura Wexley. I placed them in a folder bag, zipped it shut, and went back to sipping my tea. Sunday came with blue skies and trimmed hedges. The Langley driveway looked like a postcard, every detail curated to perfection. As if the family was trying to put itself back together with landscaping and cinnamon rolls. I pulled in just before noon, parked at the edge, near the mailbox, got out, folder bag in hand, breath steady. The door opened before I knocked. Callista. She looked fragile, puffy eyes, barely their mascara clinging to the outer edges of her lashes like the last survivors of a storm. Hey, she mumbled, voice thin as tissue paper. I nodded. Didn't slow down. Walked past her and into the home I was raised in, but never really belonged to. Inside, the scent of brunch was thick cinnamon, syrup, and something citrusy. But beneath that was tension. That quiet vibration you can only feel when people are pretending too hard. Vera emerged from the hallway, arms wide like a greeting card. "Look who's come home," she said, voice syrupy and brittle. I didn't hug her. I didn't smile. I stood at the head of the table, still holding the folder bag, watching as relatives drifted into the room, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, an uncle who always found a way to make every holiday uncomfortable, even a neighbor from 3 doors down who'd clearly been promised brunch without being warned about the storm ahead. Harlan leaned near the window, hands shoved into his pockets, pretending to study the rose bushes. Always quiet, always watching. Once everyone settled into their chairs, I unzipped the bag and pulled out the 5 copies. No fanfare, no small talk. I laid them flat on the center of the table, one in front of Vera, one in front of Harlan, one for Callista, and 2 more between the cousins. I stayed standing. "This isn't a confrontation," I said quietly. "It's a correction." You could have heard the ticking of the wall clock. Then Vera blinked, once, twice. Her gaze fell to the title page. Timeline of Financial Misconduct, Maura Wexley. I opened my copy and began to read. Page by page, line by line, bank transfers, loan applications, notarized forms, dates and amounts, legal footnotes. "I didn't authorize this joint account," I said calmly. "This is not my signature. This trust was reassigned without my consent. I wasn't theatrical. I didn't need to be. The facts had more weight than fury ever could." Harlan shifted in his chair. One cousin cleared her throat and looked away. Another pulled out their phone and started recording, silently, discreetly, like they knew this would matter later. Halfway through, Vera interrupted. "Maura, this is not how we handle things," she said, trying to reassert control. I didn't stop. I picked up a photocopy of a check and held it up. "This check," I said, "was used to buy Callista's iPhone. Memo line says, 'Happy milestone, darling,' signed under my name." Callista's jaw dropped. Her fork clattered against her plate. "You're saying Mom used your name for that?" I met her eyes. For a second, I saw the child I once babysat. The teenager who used to sneak into my room when she was scared of storms. The adult I had tried to protect. "I'm saying," I replied. "I was erased so someone else could shine brighter." She blinked, tears welling up, but it wasn't defensiveness. It was confusion, pain. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" she whispered. I inhaled to answer, but Vera slammed her hand on the table. "This is family! We handle things quietly," she snapped, voice sharp. I turned to her, calm and steady. "No," I said. "You handled me like a secret. Am not one anymore. No shouting, no threats, just truth." I closed the last folder, stacked them together, and slid them back into my bag. Vera stormed upstairs without another word. Harlan followed, quiet as ever, his face unreadable. Callista remained at the table, still, staring down at her uneaten food. I looked around at the others. "You're free to believe what you want," I said. "But I won't be gaslit into silence again. From now on, I live in facts." Then I turned, walked out the front door, felt the sun hit my face like an apology. Lenora was already parked at the curb. I got into the passenger seat. We didn't say a word as she pulled away from the curb. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full of something sacred. A few blocks passed before she spoke. "They won't recover from this," she said softly. I stared out the window. Familiar houses blurred past. "Neither will I," I said. "But at least it'll recover honestly. The silence after the truth is louder than any screaming match I ever had with them. It's the kind of silence that doesn't seek to be filled. It settles, lingers, and somehow says everything." I woke to the sound of rain tapping gently on my bedroom window. It wasn't a dramatic storm, just that soft, rhythmic drizzle that seems to understand what you're feeling. That kind of rain arrives without warning, stays just long enough, and leaves behind the scent of something washed clean. I stayed in bed longer than usual, eyes tracing the ceiling of my apartment, the place I now called home. It was quiet, safe, mine. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. The weight I'd carried for decades hadn't disappeared. It had just changed shape. The pressure in my chest, once so sharp and unrelenting, now felt like a memory of pain rather than the pain itself. I didn't feel healed. Not exactly. But I felt air where there used to be suffocation. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even forgetting. It was space, and that space was enough. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table in my robe, letting the steam rise up toward my face like some kind of ritual. No music, no distractions, just the warmth, the quiet, and me. My phone lit up once, a voicemail from a blocked number. I already knew who it was. Vera. I pressed play anyway. Her voice crackled through the speaker, low, rough, not the polished tone she always used in public. "Call me," she said. "Please just call me." I didn't. That afternoon, my cousin Shelby texted, "FYI, Vera's been calling everyone, trying to explain her side of things." Apparently, Harlan had taken a leave of absence from work. Stress, someone whispered. Callista had deleted all her social media accounts. Before she did, she posted a single photosome blurry sunset and the caption, "Sometimes love hurts more than lies." I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't want revenge. Just stillness. The kind that comes after a storm has ripped through your backyard, and the tree you always worried would fall finally has, but it didn't crush the house. It just fell. And now there's light where there used to be shadow. The days that followed were quiet. Not empty, not hollow, just different. At work, a group of nurses on my floor noticed I'd dropped weight, that I wasn't speaking as much, wasn't laughing like before. That week, I came back from break to find a birthday card taped to my locker. "We missed the date," it said. "But we see you." It was signed by every hand on the floor. I kept it on my fridge, right above the magnet that read, "Do no harm, but take no crap." My therapist emailed me 2 days later. "You did what many can't. You stood up when it hurt the most. Now let rest do what justice can't." I didn't reply. I just sat with it. Lenora showed up one evening with homemade soup and a yellow sticky note on the lid. "Nothing heals like time and turmeric." She didn't stay long, just hugged me like someone who knew the language of silence. That night, I opened the letter I'd once written to Varatha, one I never sent. I reread it slowly, word by word, tracing my old pain like it was someone else's journal. At the bottom, I added one final sentence. "You taught me how to be invisible, but you also taught me what not to become." Then I saved the file under a new name, Unsent My Freedom. 2 weeks later, I sat across from a nonprofit attorney in a modest office above a bookstore that smelled like old paper and cinnamon. I asked how I could volunteer specifically for women recovering from identity theft, especially when it came from their own families. She handed me a clipboard of forms, then paused. "You'd be surprised how many come in here with your story," she said softly. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last." That night, I opened a blank document on my laptop and started a blog. Anonymously. I titled it, Daughter Unwritten. I didn't write because I needed followers. I wrote because, for the first time in my life, I felt like my voice didn't echo into emptiness. I wrote to remind myself I wasn't alone in the room anymore. And then, on a quiet Sunday morning, I put on my coat, tucked my hands into the pockets, and walked past my childhood home. A for sale sign was staked in the front lawn, flapping weakly in the wind. No cars in the driveway, no porch lights on, no shouting or laughter spilling from the windows. I didn't approach the door. I didn't need to. I stopped at the edge of the sidewalk and looked at the house I once called mine. Then I whispered, "You took my car." I walked my way out, and I did, without looking back. Sometimes the people who raise us are also the ones who quietly undo us. I spent years mistaking silence for strength and loyalty for love. But strength isn't about how much you can take, it's about knowing when to stop taking it. If you're watching this and feel like your story has been rewritten without your permission, let this be your reminder. You are allowed to take the pen back. You're allowed to draw the line. You're allowed to tell the truth, even when it shakes the very foundation you were taught to protect. In this country, we're raised on the values of family, hard work, and self-respect. But those things don't have to contradict each other. You can protect your peace and still respect where you came from. You can choose boundaries and still believe in reconciliation. And you can walk away and still love yourself. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever had to choose between being accepted and being honest? If this story resonated with you, comment number 1 or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't like the video, tell me why. I want to learn from your experience too. If you want more stories that make you think, feel, and maybe even heal a little, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next one. Because sometimes one voice telling the truth is all it takes to help someone else find theirs.